Sextus Empiricus explanation of Pyrrhonism. Introduction. The term Pyrrhonism is presently called skepticism. Although the first skeptic, a man named Pyrrho, famously traveled into Asia with Alexander the Great, and it is estimated that Empiricus lived 3 centuries after the fall of the Roman Republic. This philosophy nonetheless foreshadows many of the ideas that will develop in the 19th and 20th century. Empiricus begins his work by voicing his dislike for dogmatists. He includes among them not only Aristotle and Epicurus, but also the Stoics. These are individuals or philosophies that literally believe that they may find truths. As a result, their works are filled with asseverations and claims about reality and the future. That is not the skeptic approach. He defines the philosophy as
an ability or mental attitude which opposes appearances to judgments in any way whatsoever, with the result that, owing to the equipollence of the objects and reasons thus opposed, we are brought firstly to a state of mental suspense and next to a state of unperturbedness or quietude.
An example of this quietude is their view concerning the uncertainty of future events. Concerning the future, they stress never holding any opinion whatsoever. Rather, to only consider what has already happened. The philosopher notes that the task in maintaining or asserting such, in my words, confident doubt, requires accepting the relativity naturally and unavoidably embedded in all perceptions and judgments, as well as considering unbreachable or unsurmountable whatever little probability there may be for any opposite or alternative opinion. It is being what I call a doubter. It is taking to heart and finding joy in Socrates' famed, "All I know is that I know nothing." The philosopher then clarifies that there is no need to doubt appearance as appearance, meaning what one feels is unquestionably what one feels. Yet, it may not be, in reality, what it seems. As conundrum or paradox may seem evident, Empiricus explains that part of the task in skepticism is holding doubt without being certain of doubt itself. LOL. The relationship of skepticism to the various areas of inquiry, such as physics or logic, is therefore limited to finding how something may not be certain. I feel obliged to note that such an aim and practice is essential for furthering the understanding of any field of inquiry. Therefore, the skeptics are not as if unproductive critics, but rather the discoverers of new avenues and possibilities. Although it is my opinion that insisting in uncertainty, insisting on doubt, is important to any so-called truth seeker, Empiricus focuses on the psychological benefits of the attitude. Let me quote.
The man who opines that anything is by nature good or bad is forever being disquieted. When he is without the things which he deems good, he believes himself to be tormented by things naturally bad, and he pursues after the things which are, as he thinks, good. Which when he has obtained, he keeps falling into still more perturbations, in his dread of a change of fortune.
It is important to note the psychologizing, understanding human opinions as arising from desires. This type of analysis, unfortunately, took until modernity for humanity to accept. Likewise, it may be said, the acceptance of doubt is not unlike an abandonment of desires found in many other philosophies and religions. Herein, however, is emphasized not only foregoing physical desires, but also emotional, psychological, desires about truth valuations. I am very much in agreement. The philosopher adds that one should be unconcerned about the unavoidable. Certainty about values and truth is another of life's many unavoidables. Empiricus then states that, in a general sense, finding doubt consists in finding contradictory proofs. He gives various examples such as concerning the existence of divinity, the seeming order of the cosmos compared with the seeming natural injustices of life. If for a particular opinion no contradiction is found, he invokes ignorance itself as a possible contradiction, meaning that we may not yet know the opposite evidence, but that it may one day be discovered. The Pyrrhonist divides into 4 overall kinds all of the various biases or disruptors of perception which make true knowledge impossible. These are the natural, the passions, traditions or customs, and, lastly, education or the arts. These 4 contain 10 modes or examples. The first 4 of these modes concerns the subjective perception of the judger, An example of this is the difference between humans and animals. Empiricus argues that animals are very different, with widely different perceptive abilities. In an entertaining manner, he makes likely the fact that all animals perceive differently. Also, that various things in nature may distort the perception. Yes, the differences are surely not only between species, but also between different humans. As a result, he is quick to invalidate preferring one perspective over another. Yes, ignorance makes it
absurd to attempt to establish the matter in question by means of the matter in question. But since the dogmatists captiously assert that the comparison is unequal, we, superadding yet more, will carry our ridicule further and base our argument on one animal only, the dog for instance, are no wise inferior to ourselves in respect of the credibility of their impressions.
Thus ensues a most positive description of dogs' abilities. It is said that they are capable of reasoning for their own benefit, that they possess some virtues which most humans do not, that they can make basic deductions, and that they can communicate at least somewhat. That it may not seem that they can communicate is merely because they do so in a language alien to humans. The conclusion is, we cannot honestly value human perception of things over that of other animals. The second mode concerns the differences between people. This discussion borders on racism. The argument is that difference in body must indicate difference in soul. I should make clear that this does not mean intellectual abilities, but rather different subjective experiences. In passing, Empiricus even takes issue with Protagoras. Although he does not mention the philosopher, he does state,
"He who maintains that we ought to assent to the majority is making a childish proposal, since no one is able to visit the whole of mankind and determine what pleases the majority of them."
The point is, different people are pleased or hurt by different things, ergo nothing is universally pleasing. The third mode concerns the natural limit in any and all perceptions. The idea being that perceptions are never a direct access to reality. The possibility always exists that there are elements of reality that are not accessible to humans. The fourth mode concerns the judger's state of mind when judging. One may imagine that there is such a thing as a healthy, unaltered judger, but Empiricus is quick to indicate that there is no way to confirm which is the unaltered.
Just as healthy men are in a state that is natural for the healthy but unnatural for the sick, so also sick men are in a state that is unnatural for the healthy but natural for the sick.
He clarifies that the condition or circumstance that affects the judgment does not have to be an illness. It may be age, it may be love or hate, it may be hunger, drunkenness, fear, grief, and joy, all sorts of things. I must pause and make clear that these 10 modes, these sources of uncertainty, are akin to the modern version of fallacies. Of course, what is a fallacy and when is a fallacy occurring is often an unresolvable debate. Alas, some would say, if only these elements of logic were as clear and rigid as mathematics. Either way, I think it would be useful to publish a video explaining and detailing the modern fallacies. Returning to the text, the fifth mode concerns distances and position. In explaining this, there is a mention of validation ad infinitum. Of course, trying to prove anything, an arguer will inevitably need an infinite series of proofs. The sixth mode is the simple fact that any perception is never isolated from other perceptions. The very air that surrounds the object is something that may distort the perception. In fact, the very composition of our eyes and the mind that processes our sight is included in this mode. The seventh mode is rather strange. It seems to invoke the possibly deceptive composition of whatever is being observed. The examples revolve around the idea that too many or much of a thing may change the appearance of those things. Silver, sand, and wine are used as examples. The eighth mode is titled relativity. It is twofold: that of the observer to the object being perceived, and that of the various parts of the objects with each other or with things surrounding it. Of course, it is difficult to imagine of anything that is not relative, perhaps color, but of course, even the experience of color may be so. Perhaps eyes that see infrared, but not blue, see infrared as red, red as orange, orange as yellow, yellow as green, and green as blue. The ninth mode concerns habit and rarity. This seems limited to value judgments such as how impressive or common something is. Gold is used as one of the examples, meaning it is understood that gold is only held as valuable because of its rarity. The 10th and final mode is principally concerned with ethics or social judgments. It is the fact that humans value what they already believe or have been taught. Humanoids have great trouble in accepting change or criticizing themselves. Empiricus provides many examples. The most curious is that he says that the Persians permit homosexual activity, but that the Romans forbid it. This suggests that he is writing after the Christian conquest of Western civilization. It is said, in another example, that the Egyptians and other barbarians permit incestuous marriages and intercourses, but that it has ever been illegal in Rome and Greece. These examples are to say that good and evil, appropriate and inappropriate, are fictitious constructs. Of course, few asseverations could be more modern. If one wishes to know more, Friedrich Nietzsche is always a popular source. About incest, the historian Diodorus Siculus provides more or less the same explanation, but he is quick to point out that incestual intercourse is proven wrong by its tendency to yield atrophied children. Of course, now we know that such intercourse harms the genetic constitution of the offspring, even when it is not apparent or evident. But that does not mean it is morally wrong. It merely means that it is unsafe for the well-being of the species. Empiricus then provides a series of 5 extra modes of uncertainty. I will not explain these in detail as they seem to me rather redundant. Among them, the main salient is the distinction between regress ad infinitum and circular reasoning. Of course, both fallacies are due to the need for a sacred if, an assumed hypothesis or premise. The philosopher explains that empiricism naturally suffers from regress ad infinitum. It ever needs another proof to prove the proof. Rationalism, on the other hand, ever requires circular reasoning. The hypothesis must ever be its own proof. Skipping ahead, Empiricus introduces doubt into the question of causality. I find this most impressive as it is very similar to the Enlightenment thoughts of David Hume. The current philosopher credits a certain Anaxidemus with furnishing the modes which dispel any certainty on the question. Unfortunately, as Empiricus does not delve into these modes with great detail, neither will I. The first mode deals with the absurdity laden in attempting to prove the non-apparent cause by way of the apparent.
The second mode shows how often, when there is ample scope for ascribing the object of investigation to a variety of causes, some of them account for it one way only.
The third is concerned with the fiction that is the notion of order. The fourth is assuming that what is true of what is apparent must also be true of the non-apparent. This latter notion has certainly been problematic in contemporary physics, LOL. The remaining 4 modes can simply be summed up by saying that dogmatists are bad theorists. Like I said, Empiricus does not yet explain these modes in detail. The philosopher then shares details about the terms or language used by the skeptics. This was considered important as part of the task was to deny certainty while likewise not affirming uncertainty. Rather, to maintain a completely neutral doubt. The whole seems to me to be a bit trivial, but Empiricus does spend some time discussing it. I will skip ahead. Instead, let me quote how he might share my own attitude about the subject.
It does not become the skeptic to wrangle over expressions, and besides it is to our advantage that even to these expressions no absolute significance would be ascribed, but one that is relative and relative to the skeptics.
The last portion of this introduction attempts to distinguish or clarify the differences between various other philosophies and proper, or real, skepticism. The first of these similar, although distinct, philosophies is termed as that of Heraclitus. I found this section most valuable as it explains, by implication, some of the now lost philosophy. The issue by which the two may be confused lies in the fact that Heraclitus thought that all things also contained, or somehow allowed or permitted, their contrary. Meaning that the contrary of any one thing is itself a derivative or a result of the thing itself. Empiricus explains that since the skeptics
hold that the same thing is the subject of opposite appearances,
the thing itself may be considered
preliminary to holding that it is the subject of opposite realities.
He gives the example of food changing taste, often to a seeming opposite, depending on the taster's health or physical condition. Yet, this initial similarity does not mean that the skeptics agree with Heraclitus about any asseveration on the reality of existence. Meaning, they would at most agree that things seem to change, but not whether they do or what they really are. Similarly occurs with Democritus. He is similar in that he agrees that appearances change. However, like Heraclitus, he too makes asseverations about the true nature of reality. In his case, atoms and void. Then there is reference to a philosophy termed Cyrenaicism. This is similar to, or has an element of, the famed or infamous hedonism. Either way, it agrees with skepticism in that only mental states may be known. However,
it says that the end is pleasure and the smooth motion of the flesh, whereas we say it is quietude, which is the opposite of their end. For whether pleasure be present or not, the man who positively affirms pleasure to be the end undergoes perturbations.
Also, this philosophy claims that there is a concrete reality, but that humans may only access impressions of it. Skepticism, of course, does not even claim that there might or might not be a concrete reality. As some say nowadays, maybe everything is nothing more than a simulation, LOL. Then there is mention of my beloved Protagoras. After quoting his eternal opening sentences about the only sentences of him that survive, Empiricus recognizes the similarities as Protagoras
posits only what appears to each individual, and thus he introduces relativity.
Yet, some details of his now lost philosophy clearly contradict. It appears that the sophist claimed something about the natural flux or change of nature. As such, according to him, what each object seems like results from both the observer and the natural constitution of the object. Such claims are taken as dogma and therefore disagree with Empiricus's philosophy. Plato's Academy is discussed in greater length than the others. To make a long discussion short, let me say that initially, with Plato's writing, there seems to be plenty of skepticism. Consider how Empiricus argues.
Where Socrates is introduced either as talking playfully with his auditors or as arguing against sophists, he shows, they say, an excitatory and dubitative character.
Certainly, that has ever seemed the case to me. Plato's dialogues are far from linear and monolith truth valuations. Instead, they are as if a loose exploration without any intention or end. More often than not, although some dialogues are otherwise, no conclusion is reached. Regardless, Plato and his followers, the other heads of the Academy, were not entirely willing to suspend judgment or belief. They do make plenty of claims about divinity, nature, fate, and reason itself. Empiricus says that the new Academy admits that all things are non-apprehensible, yet they admit this as an asseveration, which to him is not enough. A certain Arcesilaus, the president of the so-called Middle Academy, is credited as the most similar to Pyrrho. I feel obliged to note, at the end of this discussion it seems that Platonic thought as if fused with Stoicism. The matter is not described in detail. Truly, even if one finds the skeptic asseverations silly or meaningless, the writing is a valuable preserver of intellectual history. Anyways, the last of these comparisons is with something titled medical empiricism. This being at a time well before standardized medical practice and academies, there must have been a lot of differing medical schools. This one shared or incorporated many elements of skepticism as it
alone of the medical systems appears to avoid rash treatment of things non-evident by arbitrary assertions.
Obviously, doctors prefer appearing as if they knew everything. Either way, this medical school was guided by the patient's own sensations and never claimed to know the cause and universal solution to any malady. In conclusion, I must mention how funny and commendable it is that Empiricus described in an analytical manner these ideas that are naturally ambiguous. In modernity, many will say these things, but few will try to say them in this manner. Although I usually end each video with at least one of the aphorisms that occurred to me as I read the text, unfortunately, I cannot credit any from Empiricus. Nonetheless, I gift you some that are related in concept or theme.
If you take pleasure in your discovery or truth, then, in all likelihood, you are spellbound by emotional stupidity.
Where the explorer dies, there geography ends.
I have never lost an argument, for I never argue, I always merely inquire into the truth.
Truth is fickle. It never comes to those that adore it and only reveals itself to those who scorn it. So, if you want truth, flaunt your love for doubt.
If you enjoy or gain from my aphorisms, know that I have thousands. I will be writing books with short thematic essays composed out of aphorisms. These essays are profound and intriguing yet easy to read. For very cheap copies, look up Protagoras Pause in the Amazon website. I repeat, Protagoras Pause, that's my name.